the emperor who chose to master himself first. Marcus Aurelius was no ordinary philosopher. He was an emperor, arguably one of the most powerful men of his time, commanding armies, ruling over a vast empire, and facing constant political intrigue and war. And yet, his most famous work, Meditations, contains no grand strategies for military conquest, no calls for glory, and no declarations of dominance over others. Instead, he wrote quietly to himself, reminding his own heart of the importance of patience, humility, and above all, self-control. In those pages, Marcus never pretended to be immune to anger. He acknowledged its presence. He knew the sting of insult, the frustration of failure, the weariness of betrayal. But more than once, he returned to one profound observation: how much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it? These words were not a distant philosophical musing, but a reflection born from experience, from the daily challenges of power, responsibility, and human imperfection. To rule the world, Marcus believed, was secondary. The greater task was to rule oneself. For a Stoic, anger was not a sign of strength, it was a sign of internal imbalance, a storm in the mind that clouds judgment and turns reason into chaos. Marcus saw this clearly. Even as he stood atop the Roman world, he understood that the true battlefield was not out there in the provinces or Senate chambers. It was within his own soul. The enemy was not the barbarian at the gate, but the fury in his own chest. And so, he trained his thoughts like a soldier sharpens his blade. He rehearsed reason, not revenge. He sought perspective, not punishment. In a life filled with provocations, he chose stillness. In a position where wrath was easy and unquestioned, he pursued gentleness. This choice, to master the self before mastering others, is what makes Marcus so enduringly relevant. In a world that often rewards reaction over reflection and views anger as a kind of power, Marcus reminds us that true power lies in restraint, not the suppression of feeling, but the ability to see clearly through the haze of emotion. To remain unmoved by insult, not because it doesn't hurt, but because one has learned that dignity does not depend on the approval or the offense of others. For Marcus, the dignity of a human being was found in rationality. Anger, when left unchecked, strips away that rationality and leaves us acting like those we condemn. He wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." He did not seek to mirror the faults of others, but to rise above them, not with arrogance, but with discipline, not with coldness, but with compassion born of understanding. In Meditations, there are no grand declarations of a man who conquered the world. There are quiet pages filled with reminders to himself, to forgive more easily, to expect human flaws, to remain calm under pressure, to never allow anger to control him. And perhaps that is the paradox of Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who could command legions but knew that the greatest victory was not external. It was internal. To remain upright when provoked, to stay gentle when wounded, to respond with reason when enraged. These were the qualities of greatness he aspired to, not because they were easy, but because they were right. Anger, Marcus believed, may come knocking, but it is we who choose whether to let it in. And with each refusal, we don't grow weaker, we grow stronger. Not with clenched fists, but with clear eyes and a steady soul. Anger is a failure of reason. In the quiet lines of Meditations, Marcus Aurelius returns again and again to one central idea, that the human mind was designed to see clearly. When that clarity is lost, when it is clouded by emotion, impulsiveness, or ego, so too is the essence of our nature. And nowhere is this more evident than in the grip of anger. Marcus never denies that anger is natural. He does not pretend that we can live without ever being provoked, insulted, or wronged. But he insists that we are not bound to follow where anger leads. In fact, he argues that when we do, we are not being true to ourselves, not to the rational moral beings we were meant to be. He writes, "You always own the option of having no opinion." It sounds simple, even disarming, but within this sentence lies a profound truth. Anger does not erupt from events themselves. It comes from the meaning we assign to them, from our judgments, from the stories we tell ourselves in the heat of the moment. He insulted me, she disrespected me. This is unacceptable. Yet Marcus reminds us, all of that is interpretation. All of that is optional. When we forget this, we fall into the trap of assuming we have no choice, that anger is automatic, justified, even righteous. But to the Stoic mind, anger is not proof of strength. It is a signal of internal failure, a moment where reason has faltered and the passions have taken command. Marcus does not scold us for feeling anger. He simply invites us to notice when it arrives, to pause, to remember that our first impression is not always true, that just because something feels offensive does not mean it is offensive, that just because a word stings does not mean it defines us. And this, to Marcus, is where freedom lives, not in controlling the world, but in refusing to be controlled by it. Not in silencing emotion by force, but in allowing reason to speak first and loudest. It is important to understand that Marcus is not promoting suppression. He is not saying, ignore your feelings. He is saying, don't mistake your feelings for facts. Anger, left unexamined, grows into stories about what others owe us, about how things should have been. These stories, he believes, are the real cause of suffering. Not the event, but the mind's reaction to it. When we let anger drive us, we often say or do things we later regret. The Stoics called this the passion of impulse, a moment when reason is overtaken by instinct. But Marcus believed that we are never without a choice. Even when stirred by injustice, even when burned by betrayal, we can choose to respond with wisdom. To him, the loss of reason is the true danger. Because when reason is lost, we lose ourselves. We say things that do not reflect our character. We lash out in ways that harm not just others, but the part of us that seeks to live with dignity. This is why Marcus trained his mind daily, not to become emotionless, but to remain anchored when emotion tried to sweep him away. He knew that anger could be seductive, that it can feel powerful, even justified. But he also saw what it cost: the erosion of inner peace, the breakdown of perspective, the damage done in moments of blindness. He asked himself hard questions. Is this anger helping me? Is it improving the situation? Or is it simply noise, clouding my ability to think, to see, to act with purpose? In these moments, Marcus always returned to clarity, because for him, clarity was the compass, and reason was the path back. To the Stoic, to be angry is not to be strong. To be angry is to be lost. Strength lies in knowing when to pause. Wisdom lies in choosing not to act on every flame that flickers in the mind. And peace, the kind that endures, comes from the calm that only reason can provide. Expecting others to be perfect is irrational. Marcus Aurelius began many of his mornings not with grand strategies of war or royal proclamations, but with a quiet reminder. Today I shall meet with meddling, ungrateful, arrogant, deceitful, envious, and unsocial people. These are not the words of a cynic, but of a man choosing clarity over illusion. For Marcus, the root of much human frustration, especially anger, lay not in the behavior of others, but in our expectations of them. We grow angry when people disappoint us, when they betray our trust, when they fall short of how we believe they should behave. But Marcus, with the insight of a Stoic, asked a deeper question. Why are we so surprised? He believed that anger often disguises itself as moral outrage, but beneath that mask lies something more vulnerable: unmet expectations. We expect others to be kind, just, rational. We expect them to see things as we do, to value what we value. And when they don't, we feel offended, hurt, or betrayed. But Marcus understood that expecting perfection from imperfect beings is a kind of self-deception. To hold the world to an idealized standard is to invite endless disappointment. It's not that kindness and fairness are unworthy values. They are deeply noble. But to demand them from everyone in every situation is to wage war with reality itself. In meditations, he reflects not with bitterness, but with acceptance. People act from their own perceptions, shaped by ignorance, fear, habit, and desire. They do not harm us because they are evil by nature, but because they are human, flawed, struggling, just as we are. This insight doesn't make wrongdoing acceptable, but it makes it understandable. And understanding, Marcus believed, is the doorway to peace. To expect the arrogant not to be arrogant, the greedy not to be greedy, is like being angry at fire for being hot, or the wind for being cold. The Stoic approach is not to excuse harmful behavior, but to place it in context, so we're not shocked, and therefore not unmoored by it. When we understand people as they truly are, not as we wish them to be, we suffer less, we remain steadier. The world becomes less of a battlefield and more of a place where we practice steadiness, resilience, and compassion. Marcus's approach wasn't passive. He didn't suggest we tolerate cruelty or accept injustice silently, but he insisted that our response come from reason, not reflex. If someone wrongs us, we are free to speak, to act, but only after we've steadied our judgment, only after we've let go of the idea that their imperfection is somehow an offense against the order of the universe. He reminds us, they are like this because they do not know the difference between good and evil. It's not a dismissal, it's a diagnosis, and from that clarity we can respond not with fury, but with understanding. In this way, Marcus trains the mind not to resent, but to recognize, to see clearly what is in front of us and not be dragged into storms of frustration and blame. He knew that life with others would always involve friction, but he also knew that friction need not lead to fire. This shift from expectation to observation is subtle but powerful. When we expect others to be perfect, every flaw feels like a betrayal, but when we expect them to be human, flaws no longer surprise us. We respond with steadiness, not shock, with discernment, not despair. It is not that Marcus gave up on people. On the contrary, he held himself to high moral standards and hoped others would rise with him, but he refused to be controlled by their failures. He refused to let their behavior dictate his peace, and this is the heart of the Stoic view. We are responsible not for the nature of others, but for our response to them. The more we release our unrealistic expectations, the less we are ruled by disappointment. And the less we are ruled by disappointment, the freer we become. Marcus teaches us this not to lower our hopes, but to lift our perspective. To see the world not as it should be in every moment, but as it is. And in doing so, we regain control, not over others, but over ourselves. Because peace doesn't come from fixing everyone, it comes from understanding that we were never meant to. The offender hurts himself more than you. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." In these few words lies a quiet strength, one that refuses to be pulled into the chaos of another person's wrongdoing. For Marcus to respond to harm with hatred, to meet insult with insult, is not justice. It is surrender. When someone offends us, something instinctive rises. Anger, hurt, the desire to strike back. We want to restore balance, to show we were not weak, to make them feel what they made us feel. But Marcus reminds us, by doing so, we don't rise above the one who wronged us. We fall beside them. To react in kind is to give them power. It's to allow their loss of reason to infect our own. The offender, in acting unjustly, has already harmed himself. He has stepped outside of reason, outside of virtue, outside of the harmony of a rational mind. He is no longer acting from his highest self, but from impulse, pride, or ignorance. So why, Marcus asks, should we follow? The Stoic view is not one of indifference or cold detachment. It is a call to clarity. When someone insults you, it does not mean you are less worthy. When someone slanders you, it does not stain your character. Their actions speak only of them. To let those actions define your internal world is to hand over your peace to a thief. Marcus knew the damage done by anger is often greater than the original offense. How much more grievous are the consequences of anger than the causes of it, he wrote. The insult passes quickly, but the resentment we cling to can poison days, weeks, even years. The true cost is not the words they said, but the calm we abandoned in order to fight them. In this way, the one who lashes out is not victorious. They are already suffering. A soul at peace does not seek to wound others. A steady mind does not insult. Cruelty, arrogance, and malice all arise from inner turmoil. So when someone wrongs us, we are not looking at strength. We are witnessing imbalance. Understanding this changes the way we see conflict. The person who acts unjustly has already committed a harm against himself. He has acted beneath his own nature. To return harm for harm is to double the injury, not repair it. And so Marcus chose a different path. He chose to preserve his mind, to remain the kind of man he aspired to be, even when others forgot who they were. His revenge, if it can be called that, was his refusal to become like them. This is not an easy stance. It takes immense strength to stay calm when provoked. It requires deep clarity to see beyond the surface of an offense. But Marcus believed that this restraint is the true measure of a person. Not how fiercely they can retaliate, but how firmly they can hold to their principles. To be unlike the one who injured you is not weakness. It is a kind of triumph. It is the strength of character that says, I will not let someone else's darkness extinguish my light. Even when injustice stings, Marcus invites us to remember, Their words are theirs, their behavior is theirs, their fall from reason is their own. Let them bear it. Let them carry what is theirs. Do not pick it up and make it yours, because the moment you choose to remain composed, to act with dignity, to stay aligned with your values, that moment is freedom. That moment is power, not over others, but over yourself. And that to Marcus was the only power worth having. Anger is short madness, and you are not young. Marcus Aurelius saw anger not as a show of strength, but as a momentary madness, a fire that burns through reason, leaving clarity in ashes. He understood something many of us forget in the heat of emotion, that we are not our impulses. We are the awareness that chooses what to do with them. He once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts." With this, Marcus was pointing to a deep truth. What we allow to settle in the mind eventually stains the soul. If we let anger sit too long, it becomes something more than a passing cloud. It becomes the sky itself. But anger, in its raw form, is nothing more than energy. It rises quickly, it burns hot, and if unchecked, it consumes. Yet for the Stoics, emotion itself is not the enemy. It is the fusion of emotion with unexamined thought that creates danger. Anger turns destructive when we mistake it for our identity, when we forget that it is a guest, not the host. Marcus never denied that anger would arise. He simply refused to let it define him. In his journal, Meditations, we find no commands to erase all feeling, but gentle reminders to stay awake when emotion comes knocking. The goal was not to suppress anger, but to see it clearly, and in that clarity, to let it pass. This separation between who we are and what we feel is the essence of Stoic emotional discipline. You may feel the first flash of rage when insulted, you may feel the sting of betrayal or injustice, but you are not required to follow that emotion wherever it leads. You can stop, you can breathe, you can choose. Marcus teaches us that the mind, like a fortress, must be protected from invasion, not just by armies or chaos, but by the emotional storms that rise from within. If we fail to guard that space, anger can seize control. And in those moments, we are no longer free. We are no longer ourselves. We are simply reacting. That's why Marcus compared anger to madness. It is not rational. It is not steady. It is not fit to guide a soul seeking wisdom. When we act from anger, we often regret the words we say, the choices we make, the harm we cause, because none of it came from our highest self. It came from a flash, a spark, a reflex. But there is power in the pause. There is dignity in the delay. Marcus believed that the space between feeling and action is sacred. It is in that space that we choose whether to live as a Stoic or be swept away like driftwood in a storm. To him, clarity was always worth more than catharsis. It is tempting to explode, to speak quickly, to defend the ego at all costs. But clarity reminds us that momentary relief is not the same as lasting peace. It reminds us that what we say in anger may echo long after the fire fades. So we return to his insight. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. What color are you choosing? What inner hue are you allowing to settle? Is it anger, resentment, bitterness, or is it steadiness, understanding, compassion? Marcus challenges us to take responsibility for the inner palette we paint with. Not because we are never angry, but because we are never only angry. There is more to us than the storm. And the more we remember that, the more we become the calm that others can't shake. To feel anger is human. To not become it, that is Stoic. Choose calmness, not because it's easy, but because it's wise. Marcus Aurelius never pretended that life was without pain. He did not wear a mask of forced serenity, nor did he deny that some wounds go deep. He understood that betrayal hurts, that injustice stings, that loss can shake the foundations of even the strongest soul. But through it all, he returned again and again to a single idea. Your response is your responsibility. He wrote, "A man's worth is no greater than the worth of his ambitions." And if our ambition is to live with wisdom, dignity, and inner freedom, then every moment of anger becomes an opportunity, a test of whether we truly mean what we say we value. To choose calmness is not to claim that nothing matters. It is to claim that not everything is worth losing your clarity over. It's easy to shout, easy to lash out, to accuse, to defend, to justify. The world encourages it. Social media rewards it. Rage has become a currency. But Marcus saw something deeper, that the soul loses far more than it gains when it surrenders to anger. In those moments, we are not expressing strength, we are forfeiting it. He was not asking us to be passive. Quite the opposite. Stoic calmness is not a retreat from life. It is the fullest form of engagement. It says, I see the storm, I feel the wind, but I will not let it blow me off course. I may ache, but I will not abandon my reason. I may be hurt, but I will not become the hurt. To remain calm when it would be easier to react, that is an act of profound courage. It means you are not ruled by your environment, nor by the behavior of others. It means your dignity does not depend on whether people understand you, agree with you, or treat you well. It comes from within. Marcus knew the temptation of anger. As emperor, he had power few could comprehend. He could silence critics, he could crush enemies. Yet time and again he returned to his journal, not to celebrate conquest, but to remind himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. In other words, peace is not something granted by circumstances. It is something created through choice. To choose calmness is not to feel nothing. It is to feel everything and still choose the higher path. It is not apathy. It is discipline. It is not indifference. It is wisdom, and it requires far more strength than revenge, outrage, or blame. The Stoics were not cold. They were not disconnected from life. They simply believed that letting emotions run wild was to let reason drown. Marcus knew that anger often masks pain, pride, fear, but he also knew that indulging it does not heal the wound, it deepens it. So he trained his mind to pause, to reflect, to return to what really matters. He did not expect to never feel anger, but he aimed to never be owned by it. And that in itself is the Stoic ideal. Not perfection, but persistence. Not immunity from emotion, but mastery over one's inner world. In choosing calmness, we are not claiming that life is simple. We are claiming that we refuse to be made simple by life's chaos. We refuse to reduce ourselves to reactions. We choose to stay whole, because calmness, in the end, is not about being unaffected. It is about being unbroken. Inner peace is greater than victory over others. Marcus Aurelius was no ordinary man. As emperor of Rome, he held more power in his hands than almost anyone in history. At a word, he could silence opposition, retaliate against insults, crush dissent. Yet despite this, he often chose silence over speech, understanding over punishment, reflection over revenge. He chose above all to rule himself before ruling others. In Meditations, he wrote, "To live each day as if it were your last, without frenzy, without apathy, without pretense." These are not the words of a man obsessed with power, control, or domination. They are the quiet aspirations of someone deeply committed to peace. Peace not as a political state, but as a condition of the soul. Marcus understood a truth that remains radical even today. Just because you can win over someone doesn't mean you've won anything truly meaningful. There are victories that cost us too much. There are arguments that leave us feeling hollow, even if we won. There are moments where proving we were right only proves that we were not wise. Anger often promises power, but it rarely delivers peace. It urges us to act, to strike back, to defend our ego. And in doing so, it seduces us into believing that external triumph is what matters. But Marcus saw the deeper game, the one that happens silently in the privacy of our thoughts. He knew that true power is not the ability to defeat others, but the discipline to defeat the urge to dominate. Why, he asked himself, should I let the behavior of another dictate my state of mind? Why allow an unkind word or an unjust act to steal the clarity I work so hard to maintain? He saw anger not just as a reaction, but as a surrender, a moment when we hand over our inner freedom to someone else. This is why Marcus so often returned to the image of the inner citadel, a place within that no insult can enter, no injustice can shake, no enemy can breach. It is a fortress built not from pride or arrogance, but from wisdom and restraint. Within this space, he reminded himself, you are always free, free to choose calm, to let go, to rise above. There is nothing passive about this. It is not weakness to walk away from a fight. It is not cowardice to respond to cruelty with quiet strength. In fact, it may be the most demanding form of courage. To protect your peace, even when the world dares you to break it. Marcus knew that inner peace was not the reward of a perfect life. It was the reward of consistent effort, of daily discipline, of choosing again and again to value harmony over ego. And he understood that this kind of peace cannot be given, only built. In our own lives, we are constantly offered a choice to fight for dominance or to fight for dignity, to win fleeting arguments, or to preserve lasting clarity. And while anger may offer a rush, a flash of superiority, it rarely leaves us better than it found us. But peace, the peace we choose, the peace we protect, that stays with us. It shapes the way we think, the way we love, the way we lead. So Marcus did not teach us never to feel anger. He was too honest for that. Instead, he taught us how to rise above it. He showed that we are not prisoners of our emotions, and that the true victory is not over the world, but over the impulses that try to rule us. To hold on to peace in a moment of provocation, this is to master the self. This is to be, in the truest sense, free.